listed up this weekend. And Senator Kitchell, you put all the numbers away this weekend?
They keep giving her more money. She can't keep up with them.
I have even more numbers. The governor's announcing his proposed plan to spend.
Just take his budget and stamp it, and it's all done. That's it.
Yeah, well, there seem to be a few things missing in what he's proposing that might be kind of important to people.
We got too much money to spend. We ought to just take half it and send it back. It's too much.
Yeah. Well, it's great opportunity, but
I can't believe the money that's coming into the state. It's just, our town. Well, I see your town, Jane, gets more on that $3 million than I get in Colchester. So you do well.
On the 3 million for for roads.
Yeah, I read that chart.
Well, that's driven by the fact that Danville has, and I think Newbury might be right up there in terms of mileage.
Right. It's all by mileage. Yeah.
Although my preference is if we're going to put anything out, we do it in structures because they're much more one-time and in long-term investment in nature.
I want to clarify that very sharply because I don't want to expect that 3 million next year.
Yeah. Well, that's why it's better to put it through project-specific investments that are longer term than simply here's some money and go spend it however you want.
Yeah, that worries me. That's what it's nice to have all this extra money, but I hope it's spent wisely and not on things that are going to continue to draw money every year. Okay, with that, we will begin. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Senate Transportation Committee. And we will start our discussion on H433, the House Transportation Bill. And I believe we have two folks with us this morning. Anthea is with us and Michelle. And we will start the process of going through the bill. Is that correct? Is that what you'd like to do, Anthea?
I was thinking that we would pick up where we left off last week in the first walkthrough.
Okay, sure. That'd be fine. Thank you.
Okay, so for the record, Anthea Dexter Cooper from the Office of Legislative Counsel, and I'm going to put H433 as it passed the House up on the screen. And where we left off was on section 19. I know you have since heard from the agency and from Green Mountain Transit on section 19. So I think you probably understand what's going on with this section, but this is mimicking language that was included in the T-bill last year, split out by urban and rural public transit, and saying that it is the intent of the General Assembly that public transit be operated on a zero fare basis during fiscal year 2022, taking advantage of the federal funding that came through the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. That's the CARES Act, the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021. That was the one that passed in December. And then the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, ARPA, the one that passed most recently. Urban public transit needs all three. So you'll see them listed on lines 16 to 19, whereas rural public.
I want to go back on the ARPA.
Yep.
We haven't, this is only statement of intent, but in terms of any commitment of ARPA for this purpose is conjecture, I guess, you've got a contingent, but it's kind of interesting that we are referencing ARPA, and I suppose in this, because I think that there'll be proposals to do more on the EV, et cetera. So I want to just put that make that note, is that ARPA reference may not be relevant. I don't know, as a potential funding source.
So that is a fantastic point, and that gets to the fact that ARPA, like the other bills, had a specific piece on public transit. So this reference to ARPA is not the reference to the money that's being appropriated through the big bill or the other process that the state's going through. This is money that is just available to the public transit agencies that get awards and allocations through 49 USC section 5307.
Okay.
So there are different pots of money within.
So let me ask then, how is there a specific appropriation in that ARPA provision for Vermont transportation?
I believe that's a question that I'm going to need to defer to either Chris or Michelle on. But there is, I don't know if it's a specific piece that goes to Vermont or if it's the specific pot that goes to these public transit providers. And then there's the apportionment that's done by the FTA. Michelle, do you know?
Good morning, Michelle Boomhauer with the Vermont Agency of Transportation. I'm afraid I'm going to have to go back and do a little research on this one, but I will get the reference to you, Anthea, to share with the committee.
Thank you.
Okay. I think it's pretty important because, you know, we knew what came down in December. So my question becomes if there's, and I know that there's homeowners, there is, you know, there are a number of buckets within the ARPA. And so if there's something specific transportation bucket, if we could get what that means to Vermont, that would, I think, helpful. And it might be more than public transit. I don't know.
My recollection is that it was public transit, while some of the ARPA funding could, and the AASHTO just sent a letter trying to get guidance on this for some of that infrastructure side of what ARPA is eligible for. This is a discrete public transit piece of ARPA.
Okay. So obviously the House, someone must have told the House committee, you know, around this particular provision of ARPA. It raises the question for us to have more information about that section of funding, whether it's public transit, whether it's something more for infrastructure, whether it's for charging, and what those dollars look like for Vermont over the period of the ARPA, which I think is 3 years. And I don't know if, Michelle, I assume that somebody in your shop has that information.
Yeah, we actually have an AASHTO call today to talk further about ARPA. So we'll track this down for you and make sure it's clarified.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so continuing with that. So that's the urban public transit. It's referencing all three, and we'll get more information on the ARPA piece. Rural public transit, same structure. It's the intent of the General Assembly. These are going to be the 5311 programs. And then this one just references the CARES Act and the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021. So that's your zero fare public transit, and it is just.
So that must be ARPA doesn't have a provision for rural transit then.
It was more that my understanding of the timeline was that rural public transit would have been fully covered for fiscal year 2022 at a zero fare basis prior to ARPA being enacted. So it was something that there was already a plan to do zero fare on the rural side. Urban wasn't able to commit to it because they didn't have sufficient funding. You certainly could reference both in there. I believe it is a smaller piece of the pot that is going to the rural public.
So did we get testimony on that? Maybe not, because we're just taking up the bill, but in presenting, was that in the governor's recommend? No. Okay.
If I may, when Green Mountain Transit came in last week, they testified to wanting language included, which we'll get to looking at in a little bit, that the fare free would only be pending the authorization of the board of directors of the agency. That was part of the testimony that they provided last week.
Am I correct by saying when you say free fare, that's everything in the public transit, like the rides from Montpelier to Burlington or Burlington to Montpelier, that everything is free?
Yeah, for FY22, that's what this language is proposing.
God, I would think that a trip like from Burlington to Montpelier, like for $2, people would be gladly pay that. But it has to be one way or the other. Everything has to be free, or just it can be separated.
It could be separated if that was your preference.
No, I'm just asking a question. I'm sure that people, I'm in the city route, probably it's a small amount, but on a trip to Montpelier, why wouldn't someone want to pay $2 or something? And it would pay the fuel on that trip back and forth, but just something to think about. I just didn't know if it meant free fare for everything or just designated areas, but.
And the reason why it's free, is that because they're still worried about the transfer of paper money?
Yeah, two things actually. The continued potential COVID transmission relative to funds being transferred, as well as the fact that ridership is about 50% of what it was. And it's going to be a period of time to build back that ridership. And honestly, we're probably going to lose some commuter ridership that we might have otherwise had based on folks working from home more going forward into the future, which is anticipated. So it's going to be a little more precarious. And so we want to provide an incentive for folks to want to return to riding the bus.
As far as handling the money, I mean, every business in the world is handling money these days. And so that's not we've been doing, everybody does it in the retail business. Having said that, 90% is credit cards these days. I mean, it's not, cash it's very, very seldom you get cash anymore, but I think it's going to be less and less every year. Okay, let's move on. Thank you.
Okay, so going back to our bill, the next section is section 20. I believe you heard testimony from the agency on this last week. This is not requiring any sort of deliverable back to the General Assembly, but it is telling the agency, in coordination with public transit, passenger rail, and other transportation service providers, to review and implement coordinated intermodal connections to the extent practicable, and to assure efficient and accessible intermodal transportation opportunities in Vermont. The agency is also tasked with working with transportation service providers to support the cross promotion of intermodal connections, like going from the bus to the train. So that is section 20, direction to the agency.
Could I ask, that assumes that there's not a structure to do that now. It's not happening.
That's a Michelle question.
So it is happening now. And I think a House member felt that it could be happening more effectively, and by adding it to statute, that it would provide more direction to the agency to do what we already do. Sorry.
All right, I like that. Provide more direction to do what we already do. It's just, it drives me nuts, all this gratuitous language, but but maybe if we're going to do something relative to the climate change and make that more obvious, that would be a better structure to put that kind of statement in. So I want to set that one aside too.
Okay.
So you can continue doing what you're already doing, but we will connect it. We will connect it to that larger framework, Michelle.
And it's always nice to have folks bring to our attention where we could be doing a better job. And I do appreciate the feedback. So we've received it.
All right, go right ahead.
Okay, so your next section is section 21. You've not heard testimony on this, and for a lot of your technical questions, I think there are people that you're going to hear testimony from later this week that will be able to answer them better than I can. But this is requiring the state's electric distribution utilities to engage in PEV rate design. So subsection A is specifying sort of what the goals are, and it's to encourage efficient integration of plug-in electric vehicles and electric vehicle supply equipment, that's the technical term for the charging stations, into the electric system, and the timely adoption of PEVs and public charging through managed loads or time differentiated price signals. So that's the goal of the balance of the language we're going to look at.
So this would have to go into finance because this gets into rates, utilities and rates.
So the way this was handled on the House side was they asked House Energy and Technology to look at the language. House Energy and Technology took a lot of testimony from the electric distribution utilities, from the Public Service Department, I believe from the PUC as well. And then that committee made a recommendation to House Transportation, which is what is incorporated into the bill as it passed. But yes, I think it's something that other committees might be interested in, at the very least, seeing the language.
Mhm.
Okay.
Okay, so subsection B is giving your timeline. So unless an
So, I don't know how we want to organize this, but I think we ought to maybe Liz or someone could write it up. It just seems like we ought to bring this section to the attention of Senator Cummings, Chair of Finance, to alert her that there's this section and ask for the committee's review of the language as it's coming in. So I think, Senator Mazza could, as chair, could send it as a courtesy so that sometimes other committees aren't aware until the very end. So if we could
Give them a heads up. Okay.
if we could give her a heads up,
Good.
that I think is something we should do now rather than at the end, which then creates, I'm pretty sensitive to the time compression that hits finance and appropriations right at the end. So if we could do that sooner, I
Did you
think
get
that would.
message, Liz? Yes, okay.
Yeah.
All right, good. Thank you. Good idea. Again, you're right, Senator Kitchell. So, just for the record, we're starting off the week again, same thing. So,
And Senator Kitchell, thank you for the note about wearing blue today. I appreciate that.
I know, well,
oh, that's right. Yeah. Is Perkins on there too? No, is it, what's he? I can't. No, okay.
no. He's in
All right.
bureaucratic mode.
Go ahead, Anthea. Go right ahead.
Okay, so knowing that others will be looking at this language as well. So subsection B is giving you your timeline. So unless an extension is granted, and that's dealt with in subsection E, all of the state electric distribution utilities need to implement PEV rates, and they could include electricity sales to the entire customer premises. That's the phrasing I've heard is whole house, and that was something that House Energy and Technology took substantial testimony on. So the rates need to be for public and private charging, and they need to be implemented not later than June 30th of 2024, unless an extension is granted. And the rates need to be filed for review and approval by the PUC, which is a process that's established in statute 30 VSA section 2025. So it's piggybacking off of the already existing review process that the PUC needs to do. Then we get into what the rates are supposed to do, and those are in subdivisions 1 through 4. You need to have an efficient use of those loads, and they need to be consistent with other planning principles that exist for rate setting that are also set out in statute. And then specific to your PEV and the hope for adoption of the PEV rates, they need to encourage the participation in the PEV rates. So having someone charge under a PEV rate as opposed to plugging their car in and just having it be part of their house electricity bill as if it was just a large appliance. It needs to encourage travel by PEV relative to available alternatives, and it needs to encourage greater adoption of PEVs in general. Subsection C specifies that if the PEV rates that are approved by the Public Utility Commission under the next 2 subdivisions, then it's sort of deemed that they meet those goals in subsection B. So the paths to approval, the first one, subdivision 1, requires approval. So the PUC shall approve PEV rates if it finds that at a minimum, they, and this is mimicking a lot of the language in those goals, support greater adoption of PEVs, adequately compensate PEV operators and the owners of the charging equipment available to the public for the value of grid-related services, including costs avoided through peak management, and it needs to adequately compensate the distribution utilities and its customers in general for any additional costs that are attributable to the PEV rate. And then it also needs to include a reasonable contribution to historic or embedded costs required to meet the overall cost of service. It can't discourage charging stations that are available to the public, and it cannot have an adverse impact to ratepayers not using the PEV rate. So the customers that are not availing themselves of the rate, whether they have a plug-in electric vehicle and they're not using it, or they don't have a plug-in electric vehicle.
So I have a question. To avail yourself of the rate, does that assume that you've got to have internet capability to manage the use and time, et cetera? It's my impression that a lot of that management of the rates is really contingent on kind of smart meters. And so what I'm getting at is it's wonderful to have the rates, but if somebody doesn't have a really broadband or internet connection, are they're not going to have the ability to access these rates? I'm raising that as a question.
Yeah, and I think that's a question that you'll be able to get a better answer either from the electric distribution utilities themselves or from Riley Allen through the Department of Public Service. I think can provide more information on that. But it is definitely an issue that I've heard mentioned in multiple committees. If you don't have internet and the meter only can, track and send the information through the internet, how can it keep the different pieces sort of straight? What's the EV charging, what's the non-EV charging?
Isn't this federal money going to cover all the places in Vermont that don't have it?
I don't know. Depends on the
thought
rollout and.
I thought that was the goals. I don't know what the.
Well, it's been the goal, if you remember, since the days of ERA. Every politician says it's the goal. It's just a matter of.
You got billions to spend now.
Well, maybe the timeline will align where obviously the ARPA money is going to provide more investments in
That's a one-time
broadband.
Yeah.
I think it's a $250 million investment that the governor proposed in his on this ARPA money that was coming out. I think I saw that last night, but is that enough?
That'll cover everything, I guess. It's over.
Will it? Yep.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
Well, I don't know. He's going to announce it, his plan this afternoon. Of course, everybody's going to have their own plan, but it is that's what I've 80 million and 65 for a total of 225.
Yeah, 225. Okay.
I've got a question. This is probably not the right time, but we in institutions, the other committee, we had talked about the train station to be moved. I think it's in where? Fairhaven or New Haven. And I think it's an institutions bill. And I thought we could work with the agency of transportation in somehow preserving that or moving it or having some involvement there. So I just want to put it on your radar screen. It has to be moved or demolished or whatever. And there's a strong feeling that it should stay or be moved somewhere, but just a thought. And I just want to make sure that agency of transportation and the institutions committee works together to come up with some solutions.
Who owns it?
What's that?
Who owns it?
It's the, let's see, it has to be the town, right? Because it was on a railroad siding.
Yeah.
I don't think.
Not necessarily. I don't know.
Do you remember Jingles?
I do. I don't remember who owns it, but I was going to raise something as well. Maybe you can jog my memory. Weren't they even talking about possibly moving it across the road?
Yes.
Didn't they have a spot right there that they thought?
There's been 3 or 4 proposals, but I think we're talking about $500,000. I mean, I think that's because it's a brick building. And I know we discussed it briefly in institution the other day, And I just thought it was something that AOT, because it is an Amtrak issue, could work together. I just brought that up today, and I don't know how far it'll go or don't go. Michelle, you probably know something about it. Have you heard about it?
Oh, yeah, I'm intimately familiar with this one.
Okay, all right, yeah.
My deputy director, Trini Broussard, you know Trini.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
She's been working closely with the Division for Historic Preservation, which actually owns the train building.
Okay,
And it sits on land leased to the division by the agency. And we're working closely with the town as well. And perhaps I could schedule her to come in and give you an update
good.
on the efforts that we have undertaken with regards to that project.
I don't know all the details. It was briefly discussed to us the other day, and we see the pictures and everything. And if there's some way we can, I don't know, I just bring it up for conversation and let the committee decide. So if you could do that, I appreciate that. Thank you. Okay. All right, Anthea, I'm sorry. I just come to my head and I just want to move on. Thank you.
That's quite all right. Okay, so going back to finish off our PEV rate setting, we left off at subdivision C2, and this gives the PUC the ability, they don't have to, approve PEV rates that utilize direct load control, third-party managed load control, static or dynamic time varying rates, or other innovative practices that accomplish the goals set out in subsection A, which were the 4 that we went through in the beginning. And questions on what all of those technical terms mean, I'm going to defer to Riley. Subsection D, this is sort of a grandfathering clause of the electric distribution utilities that have already kind of started the process of having PEV rates. So if an electric distribution utility has a PEV rate that's been approved by the PUC before July 1 of 2021, when this section goes into effect, and it's currently implemented as a tariff by that electric distribution utility, they are exempt from all of subsection B, the required rate setting, but only for the relevant rate classes, market segments, or customer segments where the PEV rates are offered. So it's broad in that if you have a PEV rate that's being used as a tariff prior to this date, you're exempt from the section, but it's then narrowed because it could only be a subset of your market. Subsection E, this is the process for getting an extension. So the PUC has the authority to grant the extensions of that June 30th, 2024 implementation deadline. And the extension can only be granted in response to a petition that's filed with the PUC. And if the PUC finds that the electric distribution's inability to meet the deadline for implementation is due to a technical inability, adverse economic impacts to ratepayers, or other good cause shown in the application for an extension, and then the length of the extension needs to be directly related to the demonstrated need for the extension. And then subsection F is the reporting requirement. So these are going to be annual reports throughout the period where the electric distribution utilities need to be working on this implementation and spanning just a little bit past it. So it'll be annual, January 15th of 2022, 2023, 2024, and 2025. And the written report is filed with the House Committees on Energy and Technology and Transportation, the Senate Committee on Finance, and the Senate Committee on Transportation. And it needs to address those goals that are laid out in C1 A to F. That's the ones where the PUC needs to approve it if it meets those, and any progress barriers towards those overarching goals in subsections A and subsections B. So it'll be a progress report and then also looking at how the goals are being met. I think there are probably going to be questions from this committee and Senate Finance, especially towards the electric distribution utilities as to whether or not this is doable, and the Department of Public Service.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Seeing no questions.
Okay.
Moving on to 22, I believe this is also a section that you heard testimony from the agency on. This is the public transportation electrification plan. The agency needs to consult with the public transit providers to prepare a long-range plan that would outline the costs of moving over to a fully electrified public transportation fleet. And that is due back to the House and Senate Committees on Transportation not later than January 31st of 2022. And while we are back talking about public transit, Michelle, would you like to have me share what Costa sent, or do you need to do more on your end?
I have not had a chance to review that, so let's
Okay.
hold off on that for now. Thanks.
But we are in the progress. Information's being gathering and emails are popping up. So people behind the scenes are working on getting that information.
I have a question on that.
Yes, go right ahead.
So what was that you just said? There's going to be an amendment from the agency on that section? Is that what you're talking about?
No, just on Senator Kitchell's question about the ARPA funding piece.
Oh.
We got information from both Chris and from Costa that I think Michelle wants some time to review. It had reminded me by the piece on public transit. But I do not believe there are any proposed changes either from the agency or that I have heard of on section 22.
Can I ask Michelle a question?
Or Michelle, she got it all.
Please do.
What, I guess the overall is what is the AOT's take of this plan? And I don't know if it says it's a plan, but it doesn't really read like a plan. It's more like a listing of what would need to happen.
So,
So what, I just wondered kind of, I guess that's a one big question, but more specifically, what's your thinking at this point? Would you like hire somebody to do this plan, or what is your current thinking on how this plan would be done?
great questions. And the good news is, so we had proposed this language to be included in the T-bill to alert and inform the legislature that we were actually advancing in this area. And we've actually hired a consultant already. AECom is working on this effort, and it will be ongoing so that we can be prepared to provide a framework back to the legislature as outlined in the language. But the gist of it is we'd been receiving a lot of inquiries and pressure from legislators and some from interest groups that we move forward with an effort whereby every single electric or every single bus replacement that we undertake going forward be the purchase of an electric bus. And we did not feel as though the pilots that we have initiated to date had provided us the level of comfort we needed to fully transition the fleet to electric. We know that currently electric buses are about twice the cost of internal combustion engine at the outset. You know, obviously over the life cycle of the bus, those costs do come down, but they're not equal quite yet. So
Problems with them too, is if they've been having problems with them too, I understand. Yeah. Okay.
we've had some problems. And so we wanted to delve more deeply into an understanding of what the cost of fleet conversion would be, what would be some of the dynamics in terms of making sure that all of our public transit providers could, you know, be fit up for EV charging, could have their mechanics trained to be able to service these vehicles, and sort of a whole litany of issues. And, you know, working with our utilities, are the utilities going to be able to manage the power requirements in all of the locations where we would be setting up charging for buses, et cetera. So I'm happy to share the scope of work with the committee. And I could have Ross come in and give you a presentation relative to the scope of work if you would prefer as well.
So this language, I wouldn't call it gratuitous as Senator Kitchell might, but you were doing this anyway.
Yeah.
But they're proposing at this time to be instructed to do what they're doing.
This gives you more direction on to do what you're already going to do. Okay, well, maybe
Maybe that goes in our section.
I just think the wording is a little weird because it doesn't really seem like a plan. It seems like something else. But I want to make sure that it's helpful to the agency. So if you think this wording is doing what you want to do anyway, then I'm not going to get into wordsmithing. It just doesn't seem like an actual plan. And there's no timeline. I mean, you could do it. You could fulfill this, I guess, any way you want, and I guess I'll be fine with that. But maybe if you do already have the RFP, you can send it.
Yep. I will send it to Liz to share with the entire committee, and those of you that are interested are happy to look at it. If the committee decides they want a presentation on what we are doing, I'm happy to have Ross come in. You can just let me know. And if you find after looking at the scope that you have any suggestions for us, we'd be happy to hear those as well.
Is there somewhere else in the transportation planning, many reports and plans that you have where the electrification is listed as a goal?
I'll have to double check and let you know.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other questions on this issue? If not, go ahead, Anthea. Thank you.
Okay, so we are now moving on to signs and a change to the state sign law, also known as the billboard law.
Oh, get rid of political signs, please. Yeah.
So if there are questions about the sign law in general, then I think you probably will want my colleague Ellen to come in. She staffs the sign law, but I can certainly tell you what this language is doing. So it is dealing with in 10 VSA section 494, a subdivision 6 on official traffic control signs. So under subdivision A of that subdivision 6, the first change you see on line 9 is just changing from people to persons. Persons is what we use as the plural for more than one person in statute. And because this is not in Title 23, it's in Title 10, I'm not going to do my standard. I think you should change this to individual. But so the correct pluralization of people is there. One thing I'm going to point out here is this subdivision is saying that official traffic control signals, et cetera, and then it's listing them out. One of them is to international airports. So just keep that in mind because we're going to be talking about the state airports, not all of which, and I believe none of which are international airports at this point.
Oh, wait, we have one, and Senator Ingalls.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
yes, we
Well,
do.
it's state-owned, but it's international. I do believe we did that a couple years ago.
Mhm.
Engel's got a big plane, so that's why it happened.
Well, not yet. It's on order.
So when we get to the change we're making for the state-owned airports, that's to cover all of the airports except for the one state that also is state-owned that is also international. So going back to the language itself. So just pointing that out. So these are just they can be official traffic control signs that are directing people to these different locations. Subdivision B is
Wait a minute. That isn't, we're adding signs. So consistent with we don't, in other words, what is this? We're allowing international airports, post-secondary, cultural, et cetera.
This is existing law.
This is existing law, right? So right now, all we're changing is people to persons.
Yes. And
Okay.
the only reason I am pointing it out is because it is another place where international airports are dealt with, and just to sort of show that, one, there will be a slightly different treatment for the different types of airports, international or otherwise. And then just to show that there is this gap in the law right now where there is language that allows for signs to international airports, but not necessarily to these state-owned airports, which is what we're going to get to when we're getting to the new language in subdivision C.
Where's Senator Chittenden on this here? Where is he?
I'm right here and I'm fine with everything so far. Thank you.
Yeah. He's very happy with persons versus people.
Yeah, he wants City of Burlington in there or something, or South Burlington, or
I do have some thoughts on that, but
yeah. Okay, thank you. All right, I knew you were going to thinking about it. All right, go right ahead, Anthea. Sorry.
Okay, quite all right. So then subdivision B, this is sort of a different tier of signage. These are to certain locations that we'll get to on the next page. but they need to be open for a minimum amount of time, and they need to be located within 15 miles of an interstate highway exit. And no changes to existing law here. The one thing that I will point out is one of the locations that there can be signage to is park and ride or multimodal centers. So that's another transportation specific piece there. Where we're getting to the new language, this is on page 29, starting at line 7. This would give the Agency of Transportation, so it's not going through the Travel Information Council, the ability to approve and direct signs, including signs on limited access highways. Again, they need to be consistent with the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, directing persons to, and these are the two modes of transportation they can direct to, state-owned airports and intercity passenger rail stations. And the geographic limitation on this one will be 25 miles of a limited access highway exit. So this is the new exemption that's being added for state-owned airports without regard to whether or not they're international, and intercity passenger rail stations. And the geographic limitation is the airport or rail station needs to be within 25 miles of a limited access highway exit. So that's your new language.
So AOT needs this language. They don't have the authority to do it unless we give it in statute.
And this
But
is-
everything still has to be consistent with the MUTCD.
Yep. And this was actually, just to provide a little bit of context, this was an agency policy proposal ask more than a year ago for inclusion in the 2020 T-bill, and then it was shelved due to COVID and just time constraints. But this is identical to language that was included in what passed the House, or what was introduced by House Transportation in the first version of the T-bill last year before they scaled it back.
Okay, all right.
Okay, and then the rest of the changes that you'll see in the language are really just shifting subdivisions. What was subdivision C is now subdivision D, and what was subdivision D is now subdivision E. We're now getting to 3 sections that deal with the 1111 permits, the right-of-way permits. The first in section 24, this is modifying what is existing law in Title 24 with respect to site plan review. So under current law, if a proposed site plan involves access to a state highway, then the application for site plan approval needs to include a letter of intent from the Agency of Transportation confirming that the agency has reviewed the proposed site plan, and it needs to include any conditions that the agency proposes to attach to the section 1111 permit. This is with all the new language that you see underlining, changing not the applicability of the section 1111 permit or anything with respect to site plan review that's done on that side of things, not through the Agency of Transportation, but it's changing the process a little bit. So instead of it being a letter of intent, the Agency of Transportation needs to have a letter from the Agency of Transportation confirming that the agency has, 1, approved the site plan, and that the agency has determined whether a permit is required under 19 VSA section 1111. And then if the agency has determined that a permit is necessary, then the letter from the agency needs to set out any conditions that the agency proposes to have be a part of the 1111 permit. So that's just changing the process slightly. And then with respect to applicability, I view this as clarifying because it is sort of piggybacking off of when you would need an 1111 permit. It's not just if the project, the site plan that's triggering the need for site plan review is involving access to the state highway. It's also if there is going to be work in the state highway. So in the first lines of the subsection, lines 5 into 7, it's saying as this triggering event, it's if it involves access to the state highway, or there is going to be other work in the state highway, the state highway right of way, such as excavation, grading, paving, or utility installation, all reasons that would require an 1111 permit under 19 VSA section 1111. So I don't think this is really changing much about what's involved in the site plan review or the 1111 permit itself. It's really just changing the process with which the two kind of run in conjunction with each other. I'll pause there if there are questions.
Questions, anybody? Okay, go right ahead. Thank you.
Okay, so the language you're going to see in section 25 is going to be very similar to the language you just saw because it is basically identical. This is adding a new subsection to say that if a proposed subdivision is adjacent to a state highway, then the application needs to include this letter from the agency, whether or not the agency has determined that an 1111 permit will be required, and any proposed conditions of the 1111 permit. So the language will track. And this would be something new that's required with the subdivision review, but it's not changing the fact that if a subdivision was going to be interacting with the right-of-way in a way that would trigger the need for an 1111 permit, it's not changing that. It's not changing anything about the 1111 permit itself. I will pause there.
Okay, seems all set. Go right ahead.
Okay, our last 1111 permit section is going to be on a small change to fees. So under the current law, 19 BSA section 1112, and I can pull up the statute if you want to see all of it, since not much of it's included on the page. There's a fee schedule for permits or permit amendments. So a permit amendment would fall under the same fee schedule as the initial permit. This language would be pulling it out of that overall schedule, and I will put this language up so you can see it, and instead saying that permit amendments without regard to the type of underlying permit will have a fee of $0. And Chris Roop has prepared a fiscal note on this one, worked with the agency, and by their estimations, this will cost the state in lost fee collection approximately $3,700 per year based on the last 3 years of permit amendment fee collection. And this is the schedule that exists for the permits and the permit amendments at present. So residential or agriculture is 0, utility installations is 100, minor commercial development is 250, major commercial development is 2,500, and an annual blanket for the maintenance of utility is 500. And then this would be adding, as the language that you saw in the bill itself, a subdivision 6 specific to permit amendments, and those would be $0. And just as a reminder to the committee, since you worked on this language a year ago, at present, the Secretary of Transportation has the authority to waive 1111 permit fees in general if the permit or the need for an amendment is related to COVID-19. And that runs until 6 months after the end of the state of emergency that's been declared.
Okay, questions? All right. Okay, go right ahead. Thank you.
Okay, so we only have 2 more sections and then we'll be through the T-bill before getting to the proposed changes to it. This section, section 27, has to do with the improvement of high-use corridor segments for bicyclists. This is telling the agency to continue to improve highways consistent with statute, and I can show you what the statute says for when there needs to be improvements. And it's being done in order to enhance safety and accessibility on highways. It's telling the agency to pay particular attention to the high-use corridor segments that were identified in the on-road bicycle plan that was prepared in April of 2016 or a subsequent update. And it is telling the agency that when determining if there need to be improvements, the agency needs to consider traffic volumes, the scope of the project, and other factors such as environmental or right-of-way impacts. And this statute that's referenced, 19 BSA section 2310, that says that it is the policy of the state to provide paved shoulders on major state highways with the intent to develop an integrated bicycle route system and make the shoulders safer for pedestrian traffic. And then it's saying in subsection B that any construction or reconstruction, including upgrading and resurfacing projects on these highways, needs to maintain or improve existing access and road surface conditions for bicycles and pedestrians along the shoulders of these highways unless the area is adequately served by bicycle and pedestrian paths that are not located along the shoulders of these highways, or unless the agency deems it to be cost prohibitive. So that's what the current law says. And the language that is in the T-bill as it passed the House says you need to continue doing that, specifically drawing attention to this on-road bicycle plan and the high-use corridors that were identified there, and providing some guidance on what should be considered in making these improvements.
One of the questions that maybe somebody can answer it for me, does a bicyclist right now, can they run in the lane of traffic, or do they have to run to the right-hand side of the road? Because I've seen it both ways. I was out by the mall the other day, and a bicyclist came right down the intersection, right in the line of traffic, where there was 3 lanes wide. So can they run anywhere on the highway or not? What is the law on that?
I would need to pull that up, but I believe it has to do with whether or not there is a shoulder that's available. But let's.
And the other question I have, if you buy a bicycle, say we give an incentive of $200 per bicycle, you have, when you buy that bicycle, does anyone inform you about what the laws of the highway are? As we're giving them more jurisdiction on highways, which is fine, do they have a course or something that they have to take before they can get a bicycle and go out in the traffic? Or because I don't know, I don't think everybody follows the same laws on bicyclists.
There is no course required under statute. There are a lot of materials that are put out by organizations like Local Motion or other bike organizations. And I believe the Agency of Transportation itself also puts out materials on bicycle safety.
Yeah, Senator Chittenden.
So on that point, Senator Mazza, I would love it if we were to understand if a bicyclist is going to choose to ride in the main lane where the vehicles are as well, if they had to get a license. If they're going to use the main roadway, it's some qualification that they know what they're doing. Again, I'm sure we don't want to over-regulate, but I think I share the same concern where your question was coming from when you have people using where the vehicles are in what seems to be a very dangerous manner, that I'm wondering what methods we have in place to require them to be aware of what the signaling requirements are.
Right. I just was curious because I seen bicycles, I think we all have seen them right in front of right in the line of traffic, which is, if that's they're entitled to it. And then there's others that follow to the right along the shoulder. But like I said, in South Burlington, at the intersection, there was a bicyclist right in traffic. And sometimes they go through red light, sometimes they don't. And I just wonder, so they have a perfect right to travel right in the highway with traffic?
So I will put up the statute.
Okay.
23 VSA section 1139. So this is within a subchapter of Title 23 that deals with operations of bicycles. And this is the statute that I think speaks the most to your question. So a person operating a bicycle upon a roadway needs to exercise due care when passing a standing vehicle or when proceeding in the same direction. Bicyclists generally shall ride as near to the right side of the improved area of the highway right-of-way as is safe, except that a bicyclist shall ride to the left or in a left lane when, and these are the instances when they can do that, preparing for a left turn at preparing for a left turn at an intersection or into a private roadway or driveway, approaching an intersection with a right turn lane, if not turning right at the intersection, or if they're overtaking another vulnerable user, and vulnerable user is defined in statute. A subdivision 2 is when they may ride to the left or in a left lane, and they need to do that to take precautions to avoid hazards or road conditions, and there are some examples there. Persons riding bicycles upon a roadway may not ride more than 2 abreast, except on paths or parts of the roadway set aside for the exclusive use of bicycles, or if it's permitted by the Commissioner of Public Safety in certain instances. And then bicycles may be operated.
That's interesting, 2 abreast, because we had a lot of conversation about that. I thought I thought we didn't allow 2 multiple riders, but okay, that's interesting to look at what we have.
More bicycles on the road. I mean, I just, like, for example, they're not required to have a light on the back of the bike if they're in traffic. There are certain things that if you're going to be in the line of traffic, I would think that you'd have to, I don't know, I mean, maybe I'm overthinking this, but as we get more bicycles on the road, which is great, I favor them. And now we're talking about electric bicycles. So they're going to be more in the line of traffic. And if we don't adopt some rules and regulations, I don't know. It's concerning because they're right in traffic. And I just think a motorcyclist has to, they have to abide by everything. But if you've got a bicycle now with a electric bicycle, there's
I
certainly
would,
in traffic.
yeah, I would think that if there's a bicycle lane available, that they should be mandated they ride at a bicycle lane unless there wasn't one available.
Yeah, I don't know how we're going to approach this, but I don't want to be the one that says no to bicyclists. But on the other hand, I worry about the safety because sometimes you can't see them if they're in traffic. I followed one the other day just down here on our road, Mallets Bay, and he was right in front of me at the stop line, and didn't pull over to the right. But you don't notice them because there's no rear light on him. He was not wearing a jacket that you could see very clearly, up neon jacket or something. So I don't know. Now what brought my attention is because we're going to give $200 to a bicyclist, which is fine. But on the other hand, there's got to take some responsibility. That's why I asked the question was, is there a mandatory course or something that is taken? Because if you don't, you just pick up your bicycle and get out on the road. So, but maybe I'm overthinking this thing, but maybe it's not that serious, but it's a concern.
Some of what you're raising is included in statute. There are equipment requirements for lighting that is applicable. This is in 1141 for nighttime operation and from 1/2 hour after sunset until 1/2 hour before sunrise. So I have the lighting requirements up on the screen now. And then for Senator Kitchell, I see she has left, but with the 2 abreast, that is only applicable for, and I'm going to need to go back to the prior statute. It is only applicable for that 2 abreast piece upon a roadway that is set aside for the exclusive use of bicycles or except as otherwise permitted by the Commissioner of Public Safety in regards to a sporting event.
But how do they know that? Is there a sign that says 2 abreast? I've never seen that before. So how would anybody know that?
I think you're probably having to hope that they are educating themselves.
I don't know. I mean, we take hunter safety courses and different things like that. And I just wonder why we're not getting more serious about bicyclists. And I don't want to discourage bicyclists because I think it's good for exercise and air pollution and everything else. But on the other hand, I also worry about who's following what laws because there's nothing mandatory that says you have to find out what the laws are before you buy a bicycle. And I'm sure some of these places, but if you're not familiar with bicycle companies or whatever, you just buy a bike and you're on the road. So I don't know. They're not going to look up the statutes. I mean, let's face it. They're not going to go to Senator Perchuk. Help me here.
Well, I have another question. I can help you by changing the subject.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I guess you don't want to hear the safety of the bicyclist.
I kind of agree with you. I'm not sure how to.
I don't know which road to take. I just want to bring it up for discussion. That's all. I'm just,
maybe it's something that, because I know like when I was in school, it was a required thing that we did in school. Like all
Exactly.
take a bike
I remember that too.
So I don't know if that's still, you can make a requirement of the schools or something so that all kids knew how to do it.
that won't go over good. You're mandating something the schools to do, and I can see that.
We got 2 members on the education committee. So.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah.
But my question is this just yet another section where we're providing direction to the agency on something they're already doing? And
I'm going to defer to Michelle on that. I told you what the statute says.
That's right. Let's just refer to the statute. That's good. Yep. Okay.
Senator Perchuk, I would say the plain language of the statute or of the bill as written probably is directing us to do something we're already doing. Yes.
That's just like highlighting it for you. And is that 19 VSA 2310? Is that complete streets? When people talk about complete street, is that it, or is complete street something else? That reads kind of similar, though, is it not? That you have to improve or maintain the shoulder when doing work on a road that has a shoulder.
It's in the same vein as Complete Streets for sure, because that would be one of the things we'd want to do is where we can to accommodate cyclists. And it's now our practice, even when we're doing, the more, not the skim coat of pavement, but the kind of in-between pavement where we're not doing a full depth reconstruction, but we're doing a pavement job that'll last 3, 4, 5, 6 years, that we are making sure to widen those shoulders where we can within the construct of the job as it relates to providing more safety and accessibility for cyclists. And we use our on-road bike facility plan as a guidance document. So pretty much every single project we're doing is evaluated in the lens of how a cyclist could be better accommodated more safely.
As you're required to under that.
Yeah.
And can you give me the 1 minute Complete Streets? Is that a federal term, like a federal law? What is?
No, it's a state law. And I don't know, Anthea, if you have it handy to bring up. I just don't have it memorized. But there is
basically a similar thing, but it includes pedestrians and.
Yeah, it's more far-ranging, and it provides that both municipalities and the agency are evaluating projects to determine if it's practicable to include complete streets elements within those projects.
And complete street elements is bicycle and pedestrian.
Yep, sidewalks, bike lanes, shoulders, that sort of thing.
Okay. Thank
And
you. That's
I
good.
can bring up the,
No, that's okay. Yeah, I get it.
I will give you the site. It's 19 VSA section 10B subsection C.
Okay.
So you have one more section in the T-bill before the effective dates. I will put that up. This is section 28. It's on the work zone highway safety automated traffic law enforcement study and report. So subsection A includes some findings. They are all specific to the use of automated cameras with speed capabilities in work zones. So the General Assembly finds that there are times, either because of insufficient staffing or inherent on-site difficulties, where law enforcement personnel cannot practically be utilized in a work zone. The objectives of utilizing an automated traffic law enforcement system in a work zone are improved work crew safety and reduced traffic crashes, resulting from an increased adherence to traffic laws achieved by effective deterrence of potential violators, which could not be achieved by traditional law enforcement methods. The use of automated traffic law enforcement systems in work zones is not intended to replace traditional law enforcement personnel, nor is it intended to mitigate problems caused by deficient road design, construction, or maintenance. Rather, it provides deterrence and enforcement at times when and in locations where law enforcement personnel cannot be utilized safely or are needed for other law enforcement activities. So what are these things? That gets us to our definition section in subsection B. An automated traffic law enforcement system is a device that has multiple, one or more sensors that work in conjunction with some sort of speed measuring device to make a recorded image of a motor vehicle that is traveling more than 10 miles above the speed limit or traveling in violation of another traffic control device. A recorded image, what is captured by that automated traffic law enforcement system, is a photograph, microphotograph, electronic image, or electronic video that shows either the front or the rear of the motor vehicle clearly enough to identify the number plate, or that shows the front of the motor vehicle clearly enough to identify the registration number plate of the motor vehicle and the operator of the motor vehicle. So it's a plate on the rear, a plate on the front, or operator and plate on the front. And then traffic control device is basically a traffic sign. And we're once again going to reference the manual on uniform traffic control devices. These are key terms that are used throughout the rest of the section. So what is being required of the agency? The agency needs to consult with, at a minimum, the Department of Public Safety and the Associated General Contractors of Vermont to study the feasibility of implementing automated traffic law enforcement systems just in work zones in Vermont and make specific recommendations on whether to pursue a program that utilizes this technology within work zones in Vermont. And throughout this study, there needs to be a specific focus on changing driver behavior. Then we get to what the study needs to incorporate. These are minimums. The study could cover a lot more. The agency needs to research the cost to get the equipment and services necessary to actually use these devices in work zones. The agency needs to research how images are, and these are those recorded images that's captured by the automated traffic device of those vehicles that are violating a speed limit or another posted sign. So how those images are collected, stored, accessed, used, and disposed of, by whom, and under what timeline or timelines. So for example, is the image going to be captured and saved forever? Is the image going to be captured and saved for 30 days? What can that image be used for after it's been captured? Item 3, the agency needs to make recommendations on, and this is specific to Vermont, if such a program is implemented in Vermont that utilizes this technology, makes recommendations on everything that was just researched in item 2. And then for item 4, needs to define the system components needed to implement a program in Vermont. And that could include implementing legislation. It could include just a program structure. The more information the agency provides in this study and report, I think the better equipped the General Assembly will be to act on it in the next session. And that is exactly what this is teeing up. The report is due on or before January 15th of 2022. And on both sides, it goes to the Transportation and Judiciary Committees. And it needs to have the findings of the study and any proposals that the agency, in conjunction with those consulting entities, has for implementation. To provide a teeny bit of history, and I think you'll hear more about this when you hear from the agency, this was originally proposed in the first version of the T-bill that went to House Transportation as an actual pilot program that would take place in Vermont. On the House side, they felt that there was more information that needed to be gathered, and that's when this was turned into a study and a report, not an actual pilot program to be implemented.
Well, one of the things you have to be careful, and I know this is going to be a topic of conversation, is the privacy of, for example, this is my second time now. They claim one of my Corvettes went through a toll booth in New Hampshire, February 2nd. Well, February 2nd, they billed me $4 now for the last 2 months. And and last summer, they got the same vehicle in New York, and why would I leave in February with a summer car? So it's kind of frightening sometimes. So now it's not the $4. I just don't want to plead guilty to it because it wasn't there. So that's going to be a topic of conversation, because once you open that door, and I'm not saying I'm for it or against it, but then you're going to stop signs and intersections, and it's going to be cameras on everything. And does the Vermont want to go there? That's a serious issue. Yes, Senator Chittenden.
I just want to say, I think you got a son-in-law that keeps borrowing your Corvette when you're not paying attention.
If that Corvette left in February, I'll tell you, they'd have to do a lot of work to get it out of the garage.
I got a bill from my car that I haven't driven in over a year in Texas.
There.
So the problem,
scary.
and
Yeah.
they did send a photograph of the plate, and a lot of it is guesswork, to be honest,
Hey.
because the plates are dirty. It's hard to see. The bigger thing is obviously the privacy issue that
that opens up a whole. I'm just saying, I'm not, like I said, for or against it, but that opens up a whole issue of stop signs, red lights. It just opens that door to other kind of surveillance of issues that does Vermont want to go there? Because once you open that, it's just like an interstate. If you're going 110 miles an hour, maybe they should camera that and say that you're excess speeding. But anyway, just thought I'd bring that up because I've gone through it now. This is my third time of a car that's been in some other state which never left the state of Vermont. So Senator Chittenden.
The follow-up point after my cheesy joke was that I completely agree. Privacy is absolutely a concern, and what I like about the direction this is going in, it's driven by safety for the work zone. So just to get us to better understand this and the implementations, and I'd love to know if V-Trans really wants to pursue the pilot, not to overrule the House, but I am supportive of this because I don't want to ram it onto Vermonters. We need to address the privacy concerns, but I do see a lot of opportunities for this over the next couple of decades. And we are currently giving up a lot of security and privacy over what we're doing online on our computers and with our phones, wherever we go everywhere. So that's just something that we're wrestling with as a society. And I think it's really helpful to start down this path just to feel out and identify where we can address those concerns in a reasonable, regulated manner. So I fully support the approach that's being taken, and I'd be curious to learn more about what V-Trans has proposed regards a pilot as opposed to a study. But cheers.
Okay. Any other questions, Senator Perchlik?
Yeah, and they're coming in to testify, right? So we'll hear more about it. And yeah, it would be interesting to hear what other states. I know other states do it, obviously, because they keep sending Mazda bills. But back to how many cars he has, so I'm surprised he's only gotten 4 of them. But I have a drafting question, Anthea. Is I've never seen findings in a section before. Is that was this a bill at one point, and then they just put it a second? Just a curiosity to see findings in a section.
So this originally, as it was included in the first version of the T-bill, so what the agency was proposing, it was 4 sections. It had the findings as one section, the definitions as one section, and then a couple sections on the pilot program itself. And one thing, and I'm sure this will come up if the agency has asked more about the pilot program, is it wasn't going to be a pilot program that issued citations or any sort of violation. It was going to issue warnings. But what I can provide the committee is with what I have found to be a fairly reliable and robust 50-state survey on what other states are doing with respect to this. And it's really interesting to see the different splits where, because you don't necessarily know who's driving the vehicle, some states choose not to assess points based on these plate captures. So I'll provide that to you because I think it's a useful resource. But to answer your actual question, one of the sections was findings, and then a small subset of those findings were incorporated just as a subsection here. And I will fall back on the fact that you never need findings. So
yeah, but I've never seen them in a section. I just always thought they went at the beginning of the bill. Would you keep them here?
I think this is a fine place to keep them. I think if you put them at the beginning of the bill, it would potentially make it seem like there was findings that were applicable to the entire bill. And I will point back to everyone's favorite section from the 2020 T-bill on the use of pozzolans, and that also had findings, and I believe they were just in a section and not a standalone finding section. But that was smack dab in the T-bill, a subsection of findings, very, very specific to pozzolans.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yes. Go
Although
ahead.
I guess Andy, I guess you're raising a point, and that is the precedent of, because it used to be findings never made it into the statutes.
And this wouldn't be in statute. This would just be in session law.
Yeah, well, even in session law, I think they got. Vince loved findings. Remember that? Every bill had at least a page of findings, but they got stripped out. And I don't know if we want to distinguish between session law and just what goes into the green books.
And if you pull out your findings, you can always talk about them on the floor without them needing to be in the bill.
Yeah, I'm kind of of that mind, to be honest.
And that we took out all the House's findings my first session.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Tim didn't like them. Maybe because of this. Aluzi went too far, and then he wanted to get rid of them all.
No, I see it. It's this unrelenting need to put more and more language in it, and so I mean, it really is articulating why you're doing what you're justifying, but it seems like that's what you're doing when you go out and present the language is the thinking behind it and why it's being proposed. Thank you for pointing that out, Senator Perchlik. Out.
Okay, anything else, Anthea?
My last section is the effective date section. There is one section, section 5, that goes into effect on passage. I think that can be made July 1 of 2021, like the rest of the bill. That was the piece dealing with the 6 municipalities that sort of moved ahead with projects under the Structures in the Roadway 2 program in the prior fiscal year. But since they can't get any money until fiscal year 2022 under the language, this old earlier effective date had to do with language that has since been removed from the bill. So I think you probably can eliminate subsection A and just have the 2 subsections for the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail maintenance piece, if you choose to keep it in, obviously, taking effect on July 1, 2021, but only applying starting in fiscal year 2023, and then everything else taking place effective on July 1, 2021. The 2 other things that
It's kind of interesting, Anthea. B is we're going to make it effective July 1st, but it's not going to commence until 2023.
Yeah, you could make it effective on July 1, 2022, but you're still giving the agency heads up on the fact that they are going to need to include it in the annual proposed transportation program for fiscal year 2023. But I guess I feel like this makes a little bit of sense to do the difference with the effective dates, because the requirement for the filing of the proposed annual transportation program, they would need to file it before July 1, 2022, because they need to file it in conjunction with the governor's budget address. So it's almost like it would need to go into effect on January 1 of 2022 and need to be applicable for the fiscal year 2023.
Well, I guess it just all gets into whether we think we need to get into that level of detail around one particular activity out of all the ongoing activities.
Well, if you answer that policy question in the negative, then we certainly don't need to deal with the effective
Yeah.
dates.
Lamoille Valley Rail, is that a highway? Is that a super highway? Because we're funding all the maintenance. Is that something that takes traffic? Does that take cars and interstate traffic on that, Jane? No. Okay.
No, except
All
for the snowmobiles in the winter, it's
Oh.
non-motorized.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So, and it just seems like all of this has gotten focused because of the way it's financed, and somehow it makes it to me, it's, I don't know, it's just part of
Sucking
the
sound.
overall infrastructure. And so to get into getting that prescriptive about what will be in a future plan bothers me, because it almost preempts the budgetary, the prioritization process. I don't know. It's just
To make it okay, Senator Kitchell, you got to call it a roundabout or reverse lane traffic fix or something. You gotta. That's what you got to call it. So
Well, see,
we're just gonna.
okay.
We're gonna call that thing we're gonna call it the Lamoille Valley bypass, and we'll be all set.
Well, seeing she's always right, I can't argue with her because she's always right. So, it's one of those things. So, Michelle.
Well, I've just seen this, in so many bills that the department of the agency shall include in their future budgets this money, and we strip it out, and it seems like it's somewhat analogous to that. It just seems like it's making future commitments in advance, and that preempts to me that whole plan development and prioritization and funding process. So that's my concern about what it does. Of course, what we can do is like we always do, notwithstand it, and it doesn't amount to squat, to put it bluntly.
Well, as we go through, now we got an overview of the bill. As we go through, we'll have a side by side, and we can make some decisions and have input from the agency, what their thoughts are about the House sections. And we'll consider their proposals, and we'll consider the House, and we'll consider ours. So we did have our run through this morning. Michelle, anything you want to add at this time? Because we'll be wrapping up soon, but anything you want to add?
Thank you, Senator Mazza. I would just let you know that there are a variety of tweaks that we have identified, either things we missed when we were in discussions with the House or things that have arisen as new information.
Yep.
And I believe Anthea and I are scheduled to meet with you again tomorrow morning at 9:30 to go over those tweaks. And then, according to your schedule, we'll have more of our staff who are the subject matter experts coming in this week to cover the sections we didn't cover already.
Okay, whatever ideas you have, how to go through it. We have one bill we're taking up tomorrow. It's Senator McDonald's about plug-in electric vehicle registration. We'll take that bill up and see where it goes or whatever. We'll do that first, and then we'll get started on continuation. Yes,
But that didn't make crossover.
we don't have to take it up. No,
Well, I'm just saying,
it was there, and I thought we'd schedule it and take it up for.
we can take it up, but I was just thinking it's,
We don't have to act on it. I just thought.
Yeah,
We don't have.
oh, okay, all right.
We're also, we still got to get back to the Blue Light Special one of these days, but we'll work it out.
And we have to get back to down there in the truck problem that we have down there
Yeah,
as well.
that's right. I'm glad you brought that up. I don't want to forget that. The
That's the
Brattleboro
Woodstock.
Woodstock. The
Woodstock.
I know there's some members that are working very hard on this proposal, but I really, really want to get this thing done away with. And I do want to take this up. I want to include it in the bill because it's something that's been gone too long, and it's not fair to the state of Vermont. And I just hope we make progress on this time because I don't want to drop the ball on this one. We've heard the proposal. We've heard the concerns of the agency. They're willing to work with Woodstock when they pave the road through the town this summer. But above and beyond that, they should not be singled out as the person or the town that says, and I know we're going to hear the argument, the benefits of the taxes they pay and everything else. Well, so does every other community in Vermont, whether it's Virgins or anywhere. They're going through the same thing. So I know there's some behind the scenes pushing that's being done to change our minds, but I for one am determined to get this thing through this year once and for all, and have this discussion because it's not fair to the other parts of Vermont, other communities that are experiencing the same thing, and why they should be singled out. And I haven't heard a good enough reason yet of why they should be singled out for that. With that, anything else anybody else wants to take up this morning at this time? I know. Yes, Anthea.
I was just going to say, I also can share the ARPA numbers for public transit if the committee would like, or you can do that at another time.
Okay. How long do you want to do that this morning, or you got time? Or
I was just going to put an email up on the screen and let you read
Okay.
it. It's pretty
okay, go
straightforward.
ahead. To do that, go right ahead, because there's a caucus at 12:15. I thought some members would want to.
So here's a summary. This has been confirmed both by JFO and VTrans. What Vermont will receive under ARPA, the numbers are codified in the FTA's formal ARPA apportionments under tables 2, 3, and 6. So the formula grants for rural areas, 5311, it's just under 6.5 million. The urbanized under section 5307, it's 7.25 million. And that's what's being referenced in the section that brought this up today. There are a few other formula grants for enhanced mobility, urbanized and non-urbanized, 31,000 and change and 58,000 and change. And then ARPA also has apportionments for the different airports, and that's included at the bottom of the email. So this is what's being referenced by or referred to by that ARPA reference.
Will you
So-
send us the email so it's hard to read it?
Yeah,
I guess my Newport one, Senator Kitchell didn't make it an international one. I'm a little discouraged about that.
yeah, I guess the feds didn't really, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Burlington International Airport gets $7 million.
7.6.
Why don't we, well, we're giving them $500,000, don't we? Every year, we should pull that $500,000 back this
Well,
year. for getting some-
actually, it raises questions about any of the other appropriations in the plan and the extent to which ESSER
Yeah.
funds should be used.
Yeah.
I mean, ARPA funds, ESSER's education. I'm sorry, I'm in a different pot. But you know, it does. I don't know whether, Michelle, whether the agency has, in light of this additional fund
Right.
of money, or you've actually anticipated it all as it relates to airports. Would you go back in and alter any of your proposals with the additional money?
I need to look into that further, Senator Kitchell. We haven't made a decision on that yet.
Okay.
I think we have, traditionally supported the airport. The question is, do they have other grants that they've received which require a match, where that the ARPA monies could not be used for as a
Right.
match? I'm not sure the answer to that.
We're down to $500,000 for the airport. Is that correct in Burlington? Because we used to be
That's correct.
at that $500,000. I'd like to do away with that $500,000 because they just got $7 million here. That $500,000, we could put that in paving or somewhere else if we could. Yeah.
So I'll look into that. And I would also let you know that the Federal Transit Administration and the Federal Aviation Administration are still developing their guidance relative to ARPA. And so we have not put forth a budget proposal yet for these funds or program them. So I'll follow up with you on that as well.
I appreciate
Okay.
that.
Yeah, it's just a question whether it would influence
Right.
what the plan, which was developed prior to having knowledge of these dollars.
Well, for Burlington Airport, they're getting a lot of money anyway, for Burlington owned. Anything else at this time? Senator Perchlik?
Yeah, when we were going over the effective dates, it reminded me of Senator Kitchell had mentioned when we were going over the electric vehicle incentives for new vehicles, that if the money ran out before there was a way to get the money to the program before the bill became, is that an effective date thing, or that's just like a budgetary thing? We don't need to do anything in this bill.
No, we could, what I was saying is we could make that appropriation effective upon passage, not wait until July 1st.
So
And that's some,
it would be in the effective date section where we do that?
well, we would, because the money actually flows in the budget, we would do it there.
Right, okay.
I think what you would want to do is have that section or however JFO works out with the appropriations committee, have it be effective on passage in the big bill, but then in the language that you have in the T bill, where we're saying in fiscal year 2022, this is authorized, I think we would just put something in there that says in fiscal year 21 and fiscal year 22, so that if it does become effective on passage through the appropriation side of things, that the agency would have the authority to spend it. So you need to give them the money in addition to the authority to spend the money. They don't get it unless it's in the big bill.
Great, thank you.
Okay, any other questions, comments this morning? Okay, Liz, if you want to take us off live, I believe.